Hello and welcome to Ag News for January 2018. Almost got myself there, John. Welcome to the new year. Did you have a good Christmas and all that great stuff New Year's, John?
It was all too good except for the temperature.
Yeah, you're right there.
It's been pretty cold, but we did have just enough snow to say it was a white Christmas, and that was enough for me for the year. But you were very careful when you said 2018.
Yes.
Have you signed any checks wrong yet?
Well, I haven't yet, but I'm sure I will.
It will happen.
Sure will.
It probably will.
Yeah.
But it took us a year to develop those habits. But I guess that kind of gives us a good lead in today. We're going to talk about the new year and kind of where things are at, and maybe if we get around to a little bit of goal setting for cattle producers. But yeah, it is an exciting time of year. You know, we've kind of got through the holidays, and hopefully you got to spend, and everybody got to spend time with friends and family. And
absolutely.
Remember what the real reason for the season was, but besides eating food and watching football games.
Oh my gosh, I watched a lot of games.
Yes,
a lot of games.
Yes,
so.
And we're glad
because it was so cold, we couldn't do anything else.
Exactly.
So,
that's
yeah.
If it had been warmer, would you have done it any different?
Well, you know, we probably would have traveled to people's houses a little more, and probably we wouldn't have watched games there.
Well, I understand.
We would have visited.
I understand.
So instead of that, everybody just stayed home.
Yeah, it was
big difference.
It was not the worst weather, but it was pretty bitter.
And it's still, like we were just talking, -2 this morning. So.
Yep. So it's been a challenging winter, but you know what they say about Ohio weather: if you don't like it today, give it some time; it'll change.
Give it a day.
Yep.
It always changes.
There you go. But
so we got some outlooks.
You know, one of the things I do annually with my job is we talk about economic outlook for the industry, and I'm fortunate we do have access to a lot of good information from either Cattle Facts, which if you've never heard that term, that's an industry organization that looks at economics in the beef industry, and of course USDA is a big source of numbers for the industry, and something we'll talk about is exports here in a little bit. The U.S. Meat Export Federation provides us a lot of statistics. So I know it can be boring if you took statistics in college or whatever, but as I get older and involved, if you have any involvement in the beef industry, it doesn't hurt to know a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes and where are prices possibly heading and statistics. So that's something we're going to talk about today. And so as we move along here, I think maybe our first slide, we have a picture of a cow and a new calf. And, you know, this is a new year, and we talked about the cold snap we've had recently. There are some calves being born during this, and it does provide some challenges. You know, typically if the cow does a good job cleaning the calf up and get them dried off, it's not too bad. Probably the most vulnerable part when we get those single-digit negative temperatures are their ears. Yeah. A lot of times they'll get nipped and frostbit a little bit, but so generally if you're calving this time of year, you do have some extra protection in mind. Let them calve in a barn or try to keep them out of harm's way. But this is just to put this slide in to kind of be a sign of the new year starting, and for this particular cow, her calendar year starts the day, you know, the calf is born, and then we talk about you know, what's that calf going to be worth down the road, and there's so many factors that go into our market, and you know, it's just like I get frustrated. You see how much gas fluctuates at the pump, and we don't always know what's coming or some of the scenarios behind why prices jump around. And then I think you know, agriculture unfortunately doesn't have a lot of say in the prices we get for our animals. We're generally price takers instead of price fixers. Yeah. And that's one thing about agriculture. There's so much out of your control, whether it's weather or politics, trade issues. There's so many things involved, and so it does make it a challenge for the producer. And we'll talk about some of these factors as we move along today. I think the next slide we have talks about numbers, and this is, you've heard the old term supply and demand. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a graphic that shows how beef cow numbers have changed in this country since 1980, and you do see a general decline in numbers. Now the left-hand bar, the vertical bar, talks about how many million cows, and the range here is kind of from 28 to 40 million, and that's quite a big range. And I think I showed you this slide last month, but how we're actually producing more beef with less cows, and that's a tribute to the producer and technology and all.
Right.
But there's been a couple of events that have really made dramatic shifts here. If you go to like 2008, you'll kind of see where the trend started downwards. And what happened in 2008 was the big economic downturn. We had the stock market crash, and the economy was struggling, and people weren't spending as much money for protein.
Yeah.
So that started this general trend down. Now also I don't want to dwell too much on history, but for some perspective here, what happened in 2010, 11, and 12 was higher grain prices. Yeah. If you think back, corn was well over $7, soybeans got over $14, so feed expenses accelerated. And what else was going on during the early part of this decade was significant drought. If you think about where the large numbers of cows are in this country, and we'll show a map here in a little bit, but it's in the center part of the country. You think from Texas up to Montana, that's kind of where you would think that's kind of the cow belt in this country. Well, I think it was 2011, significant drought really started in Texas and Oklahoma. And so animals were either harvested or they relocated to other parts of the country. And so if you're going to have cow numbers, you have to have water and forage. I mean, if you're struggling for either of those two, I can tell you that in my career of raising cattle, I've had to feed hay in warm weather when pasture was short.
Right.
I've been fortunate, knock on wood, that I've never had to haul water to animals. And if you're in that much of a drought, the water's not available. That's a big issue.
That's a big issue, and like you said, that'll drive that price up.
Well, you saw numbers dropped even more. So in 2014, at the beginning of 2014, we had the lowest beef cow numbers we'd had in almost 60 years. And so what happened is when supply goes way down, and as forages and water becomes a better situation, people want to expand. And also in 2014 and 15, we had record high prices because we had fewer animals. So farmers aren't, farmers are stereotyped as maybe not PhDs, but they're smart enough to respond to economic signals. So when prices go up really high, they build numbers. And the red bars you see are what's being projected by USDA over the next 3 years. But I can tell you, since from 2014 to today, we've increased numbers by almost 3 million cows, and that doesn't seem hardly possible when you think about how long it takes for gestation, 283 days, and it takes after they're born 2 years before they're physically able to have a calf. So what happened is farmers were keeping more heifers back instead of feeding them out. They didn't sell as many heifers. They put more back in the herd. That's typically what happens.
Because we're not getting more farmers.
And we're not making more land. So that's...
So somebody, like you said, they're holding them back.
They can tweak, and if market prices are high, the temptation is to sell them as beef. But if the signal is to raise more cattle, then they're going to keep them back. So it's kind of that supply and demand concept. So it's I'm not a degreed economist, but I think we all understand market factors. So with all that said, it's and just for your own information, this year's number, based on what USDA says, is going to be just under 32 million cows. Ohio, out of 50 states, Ohio ranks 29th. We have just under 290,000 beef cows.
Wow.
Just another
I wouldn't have thought that.
A little bit of trivia. Well, think about Ohio, a lot of flat ground. We're kind of at the eastern edge of the Corn Belt.
That's true.
So if you think about Route 23, how it kind of divides the state, west and north is pretty much grain crop country. And if you look at the state, most of the beef cows, if you kind of drew a line from Cincinnati to Columbus over to Wheeling, West Virginia, south and east of that line is where most of the beef cows are because of the terrain. So I think it's a good number. If you look at the total country, I don't know if I've asked you this before. What would you suggest would be the biggest beef cattle state east of the Mississippi River?
East of the Mississippi?
We think about the West, Oklahoma,
Yeah,
Texas,
Texas and all
Kansas,
that.
but what would you
So,
say would be the biggest state east of the Mississippi?
Well, if I would think that, I would try to think flat and water nearby. What are you
Lots
looking
of
at?
grass.
Yeah, like Tennessee.
Tennessee would be, it's close between Tennessee and Florida, what's
Yeah.
second or third.
Really?
But when you think about a lot of grass, you might want to think about bluegrass.
Kentucky.
Kentucky
really?
is the largest beef cow state east of the
Wow,
Mississippi.
I wouldn't have thought that because
But
I always think
it's-
Kentucky is horses.
Well, but it's the same
beef is
type
right
of
with it,
ground
though, yeah.
supports it. Yep.
Yeah, I
So-
didn't even think about that.
So
Yeah,
just more
makes sense.
trivia for you today, but
I would, yeah.
so
makes
as we
sense.
move along, we talk about supply, and you've showed the numbers that
Yep.
we have for that. We talked about drought, and I think maybe our
Yep.
next slide. This is a picture from about a month ago. The University of Nebraska at Lincoln has the U.S. Drought Monitor page, and that's really interesting as far as if you want to see how the country is. And if you look at Ohio and Indiana and most of the central to eastern corn belt, we're kind of neutral. We're not dry, that's for sure, compared to other parts of the country. But you remember me talking about that belt up the middle of the country, from Texas up into Montana and Dakotas. We're seeing a little more growth of dry areas. Montana and the Dakotas have been in a drought for basically the last year. Lots of parts of those states have been challenged, and that's reflected by those red and tan and beige areas. Now, yellow is kind of the beginning of getting dry, and it changes as it gets darker. So you see down in Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas, which there are a fair amount of cows. Missouri, that's a big cattle state. Kansas. Yep. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's going to bear watching to see what the weather pattern is for the rest of this coming year, to see what that does impact to the industry. I'm not saying we're back to 2011, but there are some concerning colors on that map, and at least right now we're in a pretty good situation in the eastern corn belt, but where a lot of our cattle numbers are, there's some color there that makes us a little wary.
Yeah. So I like so that kind of predicts what we seen earlier in your earlier slide of we're going to stay even in like 19 and 20, year 19 and 20.
See, Ohio,
because we don't have
even through the last decade, with all the change across the country, Ohio's been relatively stable because we really haven't had we've had drier weather, but we haven't what we would call a drought.
Right.
So
yeah, I agree.
And yes, we are a part of the picture, but
now would that also reflect some of where they had those fires?
I know, well, like in Texas,
not really,
in Oklahoma and Kansas, that was probably
that's right, wouldn't quite in
if you look at
Arkansas.
the Texas Panhandle, the Panhandle of Oklahoma, and Southwest Kansas. That probably was more of a function of the time of year, a lot of dormant forage. Maybe not a drought,
Okay.
because that happened in March. Now, if you, last summer and early fall, like up in Montana and the Dakotas, there were some fires that were drought related.
Yeah.
So I would say they're slightly different, but again, they're also in a part of the world that's always a fear to them. We don't think about range fires in Ohio.
Right. No.
Because we have more lush conditions. I mean, you take the annual rainfall in Ohio is typically 40 to low 40s as far as inches of rain. Those areas we're talking about, Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, they might get half that.
Right. Yeah.
So they're just drier.
Yeah.
Than we are.
That is just where they're located.
So
they just don't get the rain
we've talked about some of the background why numbers are where they're at. I think our next slide talks about what's going on in the beef and protein business. I mean, we do have competition from pork and poultry. Those are our main competitions, but the economic signals are for them to also produce more. So we have a lot of competition. Grain prices are relatively low, so that helps drive expansion. If corn prices are low, poultry and pork, which are monogastrics, they have to have corn. Beef, we can feed them forage along with grain, but pork and poultry are that's their main source. So that definitely impacts them. Now, the economy's gotten better. Consumers do have more dollars in their pocketbook based on USDA figures, and as they have more change, they will buy more meat.
Yeah.
They won't look for cheaper protein sources, and they'll spend a little more money. But the consumer's changing. I mean, there's definite differences in the food retail sector. It's impacting the restaurant business, like fine dining and fast food segments are finding success, but like casual dining, and I'm just going to mention a couple I'm not endorsing, but say like an Applebee's or a Chili's, kind of what they would call casual dining.
Yeah.
Those are struggling a bit. And millennials, which I don't know if I like all those terms, baby boomers, millennials, whatever, but that age group, it's kind of into the early part of the prime adulthood. They are what the companies are looking at as far as their spending preferences. Those people have a lot of clout in the market, so to speak.
Right.
They're choosing more of the independent restaurants, and this whole phenomenon we've talked about home delivery of meals, like Blue Apron or HelloFresh, things like that.
I agree.
Those people are big participants in that market. So you've got a pretty good economy. We have expanding beef, poultry, and pork production. So how are we going to deal with this increase in supply? Because if nothing changes, prices, which is good for you as a consumer, will get cheaper.
Yeah.
So I think the next slide we're going to talk about is referring to exports. And this is a pretty graphic slide that talks about how important exports are. The green bar is broiler or poultry. The red is pork, and the blue is beef. Now, we talked about this, I think, on an earlier show. Look back at 2003 and 4, how that blue bar changed so much. That was when they discovered that mad cow disease in Washington. That one cow basically zeroed out beef exports for a year. But it's gradually came back. But just to show you how important this is to each of these industries, we export 11% of our beef, 16% of our poultry, and 21% of our pork.
21. Wow.
So if the U.S. consumers' consumption levels stay the same or increase slightly, and we're rapidly increasing, it's got to go somewhere. Otherwise, it's going to get cheaper. So what's really important to these industries is trade, exports, and people say, well, why do we raise it and then send it to other people? Well, this country's always had trade. I mean, we've had electronics, cars,
grain,
everything. So it's really important to our balance. In fact, I didn't include the slide today, but they expect in 2018, it's basically going to be a wash for the beef industry. We're going to import generally cheaper lean meat for like hamburger, grinding, and a lot of our exports are higher value cuts like Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea. I don't have the order exactly, but Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Canada, Mexico, those are all big trade partners.
And I think if I remember right, in a past show we talked about our stuff would be higher value because of the people overseas had more flexible money now to spend.
Well, China especially, their middle class is growing.
Middle class that's what it was.
But there's a segment of that trade that wants the really good stuff, the high quality grade stuff. But what a lot of people don't understand is there's a lot of countries that will buy meat products that we don't want or use, like, not to get too graphic, but intestines, kidneys, livers, tongue, stuff like that we don't routinely consume in the United States. So it's interesting how that all plays out. It's interesting time, and trade is very important. I guess we talk about the president and some of his policies. I mean, I think we can talk about whether you like the tax cuts, things like that. But I think it's important we hear talk about NAFTA and Pacific Rim countries trade. That's very important to agriculture. I think a lot of farmers are sitting on the sidelines watching to see how this plays out. And so we'll see. But I just wanted you today to have a little bit of perspective of what this is all about. So I think that's probably enough on trade. We talked about going into the new year. We're going to kind of transition into where we heading as far as producers this year. And we talk about resolutions, and I don't know how you are about keeping resolutions, but I think this cartoon we got probably depicts what a lot of us, it's a to-do list that we get done the first week of January. After that, sometimes they get backburnered, and
that's a good. I like that.
That is
the first week. That's it.
Yeah, and as the calendar flips over, we get a little lax and not quite as much. But
we always put something else in front of us.
I guess exactly, and I guess the thing I would say is resolutions. They've been around forever, and it's nice to talk about them. It's good, but actually, what we're talking about is setting goals.
Yeah.
And talking to farmers, that's why I prefer to spin this. Is let's talk about goal setting.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing for you and I to say, well, I want to lose 5 pounds, or I want to go to church every Sunday, or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of that's routine or discipline or whatever. When we're talking about a farming operation, we're talking about financial, a business.
Right.
Okay, so
you're talking about
just a couple key things I want to talk about, and I think the last picture we got today is of a bull, and that's probably, as I've worked with producers. Reproduction or the breeding season is probably an area that we don't do a good enough job. We talk about a calving season that we started out this show with the picture of the new calf. Well, this guy would have a big part of that too. You got to have the bull to either use artificially or naturally breed the cow and has that calf. I think sometimes producers don't manage this animal enough. They don't take the bull away from the cows and limit the number of days the calves are born. And we've done programs on this. We don't need to spend a lot of time, but there's really no good reason to have a calving season longer than 90 days. 60 to 90 days for management purposes is a really good time frame. The bull picture, I think a lot of guys don't spend enough time worrying about the quality of the bull they're putting out, because that animal right there is at least half of the calf crop. You may have 20 cows. An individual calf is half that bull and half the cow. So the bull is half of the entire calf crop, whereas a cow is just infacting one calf.
Right.
So I think sometimes people skimp a little bit. You look at farmers, some people have to have the newest, latest, greatest tractor.
Right.
I think this is
an
investment that impacts the whole operation. Are you going to buy cheaper seed, or are you going to buy the best variety to plant? I mean, that's kind of the same philosophy.
And then, but isn't there also, there's other I'll call them factors, but maybe not. Are you raising it to sell as beef, or are you raising it to sell as show?
Or feeder calves. So
is there what's
there are subtle differences. If you're raising show animals, you're obviously concerned about how they look.
Right. Like what we seen there, I would call that a show guy.
Well,
I don't know.
That was a bull that was bred to be more what I would call a performance, or for feeder calf or female production. But my goal as a breeder is to have them do both, look good and still perform well.
So that way you get that top of the line price.
You have to establish your priorities. Again, that's part of the setting goals, and we're not going to get through a long list, but I guess that's one area you can really impact an entire operation, is doing a good job with the bull as far as who you pick and how you manage him.
Yeah.
So
it's a good idea. Good. Really good. So,
time flies.
Time flies. We're out of time. So look for us next month as hopefully the weather gets a little better. A lot of these calves get born and
growing, and hopefully it's not too muddy, and you can tell what you have.
Yeah, and we'll keep going. So until next time, we'll see everyone then.